Sean Dugas with the Pensacola News Journal and PNJ.com. It's about 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. You can see I'm riding a trolley here across the Pensacola Bay Bridge, headed out to DeLuna Fest on Pensacola Beach.
In 2012, two identical twin brothers ended the life of their childhood friend, and then proceeded to make a mockery of the incredible collection that he'd spent his entire life putting together. Sean Dugas was born in 1982 in Florida, and he grew up in Gulf Breeze, a wealthy suburb on the outskirts of Pensacola. Ever since he was little, Sean was described as compassionate and caring, and that reputation continued into his adult life. When Sean was young, his mother and father divorced, and that led him to relating heavily to other children who'd experienced similar parental breakups. Sometime in 1993, Sean was in a local comic shop checking out a brand new trading card game called Magic the Gathering. And while doing so, he came across a pair of kids who were identical twins, and the three of them struck up a conversation. They were the Cormier Twins, Christopher and William, and they'd recently been moved to Pensacola by their father after he got a new job. They had very few friends, and they were just taking an interest in this card game, so him and these guys hit it off. While Sean had been raised upper middle class, the Cormiers had not been so lucky. They had lived in mostly poverty as long as they could remember, and they had dealt with a bunch of just really assy situations. At the age of 5, the twins had discovered one of their parents' lighters, a Zippo, and started playing with it. But it got hot, so one of them dropped it on the couch, and it just kept burning until eventually the entire house was gone. Their father cited this in court later as one of the worst things that ever happened to him, but that he didn't hate the boys for it. For the majority of their childhood, their father had been running an illegal escort service, a service that their mother worked for. In 1986, their mom got busted for prostitution charges. So, in an attempt to have those charges dismissed, Bill Cormier offered this escort service to the DEA to use as a honeypot to arrest Johns, and they did that. But it's unclear if it resulted in any sort of reduced sentence for his wife. In the end, they divorced, and Bill was granted full custody. But trying to provide for his kids ended up being brutal, and he would constantly seek new jobs for better pay. By the age of 16, the brothers had attended roughly 16 schools in 8 states. They had almost no time throughout their school years to build relationships, so their dependence on one another only grew. It seemed unlikely that they would form a friendship with this bleeding heart tree hugger, Sean Dugas, but that's what they all did. They all became really close friends. Sean could afford magic cards, which was really cool, but the twins couldn't. So Sean invited them over to his house and let them build decks out of his cards, and they all played Magic. And pretty soon that became a routine for them. It became an integral part of their friendship, was playing Magic together. And Sean was one of the first people that they would open up to about how they missed having 2 parents in a stable home, and Sean would relate to that and say he felt the same way. At that time, which was around middle school for everybody, I think that, you know, an actual meaningful friendship, I think just went a long way for the Cormiers. And I think that's why they ended up bonding like they did. But yeah, so it was a solid friendship, but, you know, obviously it didn't last long, because in 1996, Papa Cormier, he got another job, this time in Atlanta, and overnight the twins were just gone to begin high school in Georgia. Despite the distance though, as time went on, the three did stay in touch, but after high school they all went completely different directions. William joined the military, and then he got kicked out. He had a kid, and then he split. He ran Waffle House chains, which he employed Christopher at as well. Both of them played poker, and William was said to be really good at it. And William and Christopher, although they would split sometimes, it would never be for very long. And over time, you know, they developed this dynamic where William was the one who was more in charge, and Christopher was more reserved and quiet. And that's just the way it was. By 2012, the boys had moved back in with their father. They were 30 years old now, and the 20s had been rough for them. So now they're in Winder, Georgia. Their dad is working whatever job he can find, and they're living with their dad's sister who has her kids, and she's disabled. So the big goal, the big thing that they were all doing every month and every day was trying to make and pool together enough money to keep the lights on. And that's the situation that the Cormiers found themselves in. Their life was spent, pawning things, playing poker, running odd jobs. No doubt it was not ideal. Sean, on the flip side, had spent his years fairly easy by comparison. He had been trying different jobs in school, but he never could really commit himself to one focus, it seems. That one constant in his life seemed like it was magic cards. Even as he got up to his 30s, he was still as invested as ever into the game, and more so his own personal collection. After a number of attempts at different careers and causes, sometime around 2005, I think, Sean found himself working in the newsroom at the Pensacola News-Journal.
Hello everyone, I'm Sean Dugas with the Pensacola News-Journal and PNJ.com. Hello everyone, I'm Sean Dugas with the Pensacola News-Journal. What's your favorite cookie to have on Christmas?
I'd say oatmeal raisin.
Oatmeal raisin? Certainly a good choice. Okay.
Well, first of all, Sean, any parade that we have downtown is a time for people to come and celebrate and have a good time.
With me is Bob West, who's the Director of Public Safety here for the Santa Rosa Island Authority, which includes, of course, beautiful Pensacola Beach. So Santa, who's your favorite reindeer? Do you have a favorite?
Well, not really.
Today we're going to be talking about some hazards on the island, along with obviously the lush beauty of the island. There are some dangers to look out for. How about the reindeer that's giving you the most trouble? Is there one problematic reindeer that you always have to keep coming back to? Now, while those guys are enjoying their first day at Luna Fest on Saturday, Stephanie here was actually out on the beach on Friday. Stephanie, talk a little bit about your experience on Friday.
Shoppers are out to find the bargains today.
One of the new foods at the fair this year is a hamburger that is sandwiched between two Krispy Kreme donuts.
Then I come over here and I get a patty out of here and lay it on there like that, and I will ask them if they want bacon.
Absolutely. Well, Santa, we certainly appreciate your time, and thank you guys for watching. I'm Sean Dugas with the Pensacola News-Journal and PNJ.com.
Great, Sean. Thanks a lot.
Thank you as well. Bob, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you very much for your time and speaking with us.
I've seen two different claims about this. One saying that he got hired as a desk guy at the front, and another one saying he was like a backrooms researcher. Regardless of how he started, Sean ended up being promoted to a full-blown reporter in the field. Seemed like he really liked it. Seemed like people liked him. He was put on to stories about local affairs like mall openings and beach safety and carnivals, Santa Claus, old people. He got to speak to cops and the homeless, which he had a huge weak spot for in his heart, was the homeless and anybody in really bad situations like that. It's just all the stuff that he cared about the most he got to report on. But in 2010 though, Sean closed on his first home and decided to quit the News-Journal so that he could move on to the next phase of his life, whatever that was going to be. I hope my cat doesn't bother me here. God damn it. Why do you have to wake up right now? So, Sean had a bunch of his cards. The majority... In 2010, Sean had the majority of his cards stolen from his house by some guy. The dude left with all of his best cards. Sean then went to a friend of his to post to a forum on his behalf. Recent theft of some 6,000 MTG cards by Not So Fast Eddie. My good friend and fellow collector of MTG cards recently had a large portion of his collection stolen by a friend. As you might imagine, he is devastated. He's trying to get the word out to the members of our community so that this thief can be caught and punished appropriately. Here's an email that my friend is circulating around. My name is Sean Dugas. I'm writing you this letter as a result of having a large portion of my Magic collection, nearly 6,000 cards, stolen from my house Wednesday afternoon. If you see this man, photo attached. come in and try to sell you Magic the Gathering cards, please call the police. He is under investigation for stealing nearly $20,000 worth of cards from Pensacola, Florida. We believe he was heading to Warner Robins, Georgia, where he has family, or the Sacramento, California area. Any help in this matter would be appreciated. Thank you, Sean Dugas. The cards taken include the following: Unlimited Black Lotus, signed by Richard Garfield. Unlimited Mox Jet. Unlimited Mox Pearl. Unlimited Mox Sapphire. Unlimited Mox Ruby, signed by Richard Garfield. Unlimited Mox Emerald. Unlimited Ancestral Recall, signed by Mark Poole. Beta Time Twister, signed by Mark Teaton. Unlimited Time Walk. 18 Force of Will. 4 signed in black by the artist. 4 signed in... The good news is that Sean got his cards back in the end. The guy either went to Georgia or California and sold off a bunch of cards on eBay and to different stores, but Sean tracked them all down. So basically, with this list of Sean's, we can see the exact collection that Sean had. We don't have to wonder what exactly the collection was when it's called the 3rd best collection in Florida at the time. We can actually put that to the test with this forum post, so that's kind of neat. And on top of that, it means something else super important. How did Sean get his cards back so easily? I'll tell you. Magic cards, you know, they have art on them, and the art is done by an artist, believe it or not, and the artist's name is right there on the bottom of the card. If you really like a card a lot, like, you know, you really like Benevolent Hydra, and you really like Eric Deschamps, I don't know how to say his name, but he's made a lot of good art on cards, a lot of iconic cards. If you like this card, and you wanted maybe like his autograph or something on it, you could take it to a convention, one that he's at, and you could find him and you could say, hey, I love your art. Would you sign this card for me? You can get a card autographed by the artist. Or you can also get that artist to draw all over your card. Some people really like that because, you know, it's the artist altering your card. So, you know, maybe Eric takes this picture of a Hydra and turns it into, like, you know, I don't know, the Kardashians or something. I don't know. Boom, now you got a personalized Magic card.
I don't know why he chose this. He drew like Sword of Fire and Ice. But he was sitting next to Chris Ron, which is the artist for Sword of Fire and Ice. I think Chris Ron grabbed off the table a card and drew this on it, and then realized it wasn't his card. So he gave it back to the dude sitting next to him, which was Zach Stella. And Zach Stella went and gave me my card that I asked to be altered.
You know, just an artist doesn't have to do that. A lot of times that's what people want because it, you know, that brings something to the table on a sentimental value. But sometimes you can just alter the cards yourself, just draw all over them. Why are we talking about this? Because that's what a lot of Sean's collection was, altered art cards. He liked cards that were different, that were unique. Autographs, doodles, cards that he and his friends would draw on to commemorate a special night. Misprints, foreign cards. All of these things were things that really piqued his interest. The cherry on top, as you've probably already seen in the list if you were looking, is his Black Lotus from Unlimited, which was signed by the creator of the game, Richard Garfield. Not the artist who drew the art on the card, but Richard Garfield. I don't know how rare that would be on the secondary market, an Unlimited Black Lotus signed by Richard Garfield. You know, if there is one out there floating around, one of them was Sean's. I doubt that went in a dumpster. It's probably still out there. And the same can be said for all his other cards. They might still be out there. And we can actually identify them based on, you know, the altering and the way that they're described in this forum post. So I thought that was pretty cool when I found it. But it also gives you a little bit deeper understanding into how these Magic cards work and how they're sold and how they're recognized. And like I said, Sean was able to get this collection back from the people it was sold to and the stores that it was pawned off at along the way. The guys returned back to California, I believe, because the cards were identifiable, largely just identifiable. Obviously, people wanted those cards, and they were worth committing a crime for, that first guy thought. So, you know, it makes sense why the Cormiers thought that it would be a good idea to try to get those cards too. So finally, 2012, the Cormiers have moved back in with their dad, and it's August of that year is Sean's birthday. So he decides to have his dad fly out for the week, hang out with him. On August 19th, Sean's father finally packed up his things after a great week, hugged his son, and he headed back to LA. On August 20th, a family friend named Patricia Burke went to Sean's house to have what they decided was going to be a routine weekly lunch every Monday, and it went off without a hitch. But either later on that day, like that night, or the day after, Sean, there's two different accounts that I found, but he was at a Pensacola beach bar, and either a friend of his accidentally or a stranger purposefully punched him in the face. Regardless, it knocked him out, and he woke up in the hospital with his jaw wired shut. He was not happy about that. Following this, he needs to go to appointments to get that wired job checked out and make sure he's all good. August 22nd, Sean has a very good friend named Derry Day. He was there hanging out with Sean when the Cormiers arrived unannounced. Even though there was no plan for them to get there, Sean was happy to see them, and they all hugged each other warmly. The twins were like, "What happened to your face?" And Sean explained what happened, and everyone just hung out. The four of them hung out, and then they went out to a pub that night. They had a really great time. They got drunk, and they joked about taking revenge on Sean's attackers, which is a detail that Derry says in the court transcript. After the pub, they all go back and spend the night at Sean's place. The next day, Cormiers, they get up and they go gambling. And so Sean is left to his own devices, and everything is cool. They all meet up again later that evening, I guess. Sean stays home and the Cormiers stay there with him. The next day, August 24th, Sean had a friend named Reese Watkins who said that Sean had come over to his house and asked if he could sleep there for the night because the Cormiers were over at his place and it was really annoying, but he didn't want to be rude and confront them and say, "Y'all gotta leave." He was wondering if he could sleep here instead, and the guy was like, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." August 25th, Sean did the same thing, and August 26th, he did it again. So 3 nights he slept at Watkins. And then on the 27th, Sean had a dentist appointment. He needed to go get his jaw checked out. The Cormiers offered to give him a ride to the dentist appointment. It was wired shut. I don't know if I already said that. On the way there, Sean calls family friend Patricia Burke, and he says, "Hey, first off, sorry to call you from an unknown number. I lost my phone. This is my friend's number. Second, just want to confirm with you that we're on for our Monday lunch plans." Patricia said, "Okay, cool." Then she hung up. At the time, she didn't know whose phone it was. It didn't really matter. They get to the dentist, it goes routine, everything's fine, and then they leave. I want to say it's around noon. I'll correct myself. Head back to Sean's house. And they're standing in the living room. Let's do a picture of that right here. Does that work? Am I doing that right? And they're all hanging out. So the 3 of them walk in there to the place where they all play magic cards together, where they have for years. And Sean, who's just not in the mood for any of this shit and doesn't really want to deal with the twins right now, says, "I'm gonna go to my room for about an hour until I gotta go have lunch with Patricia." Sean goes to his room, which leaves William and Christopher standing in the living room. Christopher goes to the smoking room. It's just another room of the house that was more or less unused, that everyone just jokingly called the smoking room, across from a bathroom. So Christopher goes in there and he lights up a cigarette and he's standing there smoking. And the house is quiet. Sean's in his room, William's alone in the living room. And after about a minute or so, William walks past the doorframe. Chris watches him walk by. William seemingly goes into Sean's room and starts getting loud with Sean. And Chris doesn't know what's going on. And then the loudness turns into yelling. William yelling. And then it turns into Sean yelling back at William. And then it's a huge argument. Christopher can't really hear what it's about. It's just loud. And then they stop for about a second, maybe 2, when suddenly Sean screams out audibly, "Oh my God, you stabbed me in the jugular." There's pounding of feet, and Chris sees through the doorframe Sean. He bails into the bathroom, apparently out of shock, not really knowing what to do. He's holding his throat. He's in the bathroom for a second, doesn't even turn the light on, and then runs back out of view into the main area of the house. Within seconds from Sean disappearing, he watches William come running behind him. At this point, Christopher feels compelled to leave the smoking room. So he goes to the door here. He leans out and he looks down the hallway. And down at the end of the hallway, he sees the garage door. And Sean is against the side of the garage door, holding his throat. And with one bloody hand, he's fumbling to get the knob of the garage open. As Chris is watching this happen, William, who was gone for a split second, now emerges from the kitchen, not holding a knife, but a hammer that he apparently swapped out in the kitchen. Just as William comes thundering into view, Sean manages to get the door of the garage open. He throws it wide and it slams against the wall. As that happens, he takes one step into the garage. William catches up behind him The hammer comes down, and just as it does, and just as Chris watches Sean collapse, the garage door rebounds off the wall and slams shut. And Chris is left standing there, listening as his brother apparently bashes in the head of his friend another 12 times. After who knows how long, the door opens and William comes back through, and Chris actually does his best to not see what's beyond the door at the time. What exactly happened after that, I don't know. From my understanding, William came into the house. If he said anything to Chris, I don't know, but he grabbed a clutch of cards off of a bookshelf. A group of cards that you'd have to know were worth some money. You'd have to know just by picking up a stack of... So, in other words, he could sell them for just a buy list price and not have to worry that much about it. The big stuff would come later. He grabbed that clutch of cards and he exited the house. Now, at this point, it's about 1:15, and Patricia Burke has showed up at Sean's house a little bit earlier than she was supposed to. She'll say later because she's worried about, you know, when she pulls up, there's some big bald guy coming out of the house. She doesn't know who he is. She gets out and she's like, hey, where's Sean? And he goes, oh, he's gonna be delayed, trying to get in his car. And she goes, well, who are you? And he goes, Sean's friend. And then he unlocks the car, throws the cards over on the passenger seat, gets in, pulls out, and drives down Creighton Road. William must have realized that he had left Patricia with almost nothing, and that, you know, he had to do something. So what he ended up doing was he called her while he was on the road, and he said, hey, Sean's actually gonna be really late, so you should probably just go home. Because he said, don't wait up for him when he hangs up the phone. She realizes it's the same number that Sean had called her from previously. So she's sitting on the curb, she's looking up and down Creighton Road, waiting for Sean to get there. Will said that he'd be delayed. Now he's just called and said that he won't be there at all. And she's worried. That's just not like Sean. So after about 15 or 20 minutes, she gets up and she drives her car away. William heads from Sean's house to a place called Home Base Comics. He walks in and he sells this unknown quantity of cards for an unknown quantity of money, but I would hazard a guess it was probably around $300 or $400. He sold these cards and then he drove to Walmart. CCTV captures him walking in and heading down to an aisle where he pulls out a big plastic tote, puts it down on the ground in front of him, he takes the top off, he looks inside, decides I guess that it's big enough. He then fills it with a whole bunch of air fresheners and some other shit. And then CCTV has him purchase all that stuff and walk out of the Walmart. Goes back to Sean's house. Goes inside, goes in the garage, lays a tarp out. Big plastic tarp. It's unclear if Christopher helped with this process. Sean was put in the fetal position on his knees. So sitting like that on his knees, hunched over in the fetal. The tarp was wrapped around him like a big old bag of Santa's presents. And then he was picked up and lowered into the plastic tote. A whole bunch of shit was thrown in there, air fresheners, spray, bunch of stupid shit, and then it was sealed shut with the top and pushed into the corner of the garage. And then Chris and William jumped in their U-Haul car. Within 2 hours of Sean being put in that container, they were on the road and across state lines. On August 31st, the Cormier Twins asked their father if he wanted to go with them to DragonCon. Based on what I've mentioned about Papa Cormier, you might be led to believe that he wouldn't be the kind of guy to enjoy a magical make-believe time at a convention about comics and anime. But supposedly, it was a tradition for him to go with his sons to DragonCon. And when he was asked about DragonCon in court and what it even was, he simply replied, "It's awesome," which surprised me. So he said yeah, he wanted to go. And he paid for a taxi to get them to Atlanta. It was during this trip, during this weekend at DragonCon, that the twins began to sell off Sean's collection. Adam Hotza ran a booth at DragonCon in 2012. He owned Hotza's Games in Chicago, and he'd been a buyer and seller of collectibles for 15 years by this point, mostly Magic cards. On Saturday, September 1st, William and Christopher walked up to Hotza's booth and began a transaction with Hotza's friend Marshall Ashford. Ashford testified that he only spoke with William and that Christopher mostly just waited around awkwardly. As the process went on and more rare cards were brought out, Ashford realized that it should probably go over to the guy who owned the booth, so he passed the transaction over to Hatsa to finish it up, which took about 2 hours. Sean's Black Lotus was brought up in the deal, but William wouldn't agree on a price with Hatsa, so it went unsold. When asked in court if he ended up buying other cards, Hatsa said, "Absolutely." I remember buying a lot of smaller cards, but then one thing did stick out. There was a combo misprint of Birds of Paradise, Mana Short. I remember buying that.
How do you evaluate something like that, like financially?
You can't.
How would I evaluate or appraise that? Like, how would I know if somebody offered me $100, $1,000, or $10,000? Like, how do I know the scaling or?
William ended up selling a number of cards for $5,884. William then proceeded to set up a meeting with one of Hatsa's card buyer friends, a man named James Brousseau, and that was set to take place at Brousseau's card shop in Corbin, Kentucky on September 10th.
Jeremy, how awesome is this?
Awesome? Pretty amazing.
The gang then rented another taxi, and they headed back home to Winder. After that, sometime between September 2nd and September 3rd, the twins paid cash for a Toyota Sebring from somebody in Marietta, Georgia. Then, they again left Winder. On September 3rd, William walked into a U-Haul in Pensacola, just off Davis Highway, and rented out a storage unit and a 14-foot U-Haul van. Then he drove the U-Haul back to Sean's house and was followed by Christopher in the Sebring. William then called a yard crew. He set up an appointment for Sean's house, and then he began to unload Sean's house into the U-Haul. The next door neighbor over on the left, a man named William Gilmore, saw the yard crew and the moving truck, and he was curious, after a week of not seeing or talking to Sean, what was going on. So he approached a man outside that he didn't know who was William and asked him, "Hey, what's going on here?" As William started describing to him that Sean was moving out and going to move in with him, as he was saying that, a maid service pulled up and started unloading into the house. And then William kind of ended the conversation and went back to moving, and the neighbor was left to wander back to their house and kind of scratch their head of what the hell. The yard guy William paid was a dude named Gary Morphus. He was doing the yard with help from his father-in-law. At some point, Morphus was taking a break from his work and just kind of watching what the twins were doing, when he suddenly witnessed Christopher accidentally put his entire arm through one of the glass panes out on Sean's front window. Chris started bleeding everywhere, so William took him to the hospital, leaving Morphus to his work. Around 45 minutes later, William came back without Chris and finished moving things into the U-Haul. Then he loaded up Morphus's truck with unwanted furniture and junk and paid him $140 total. Then Morphus left. By the end of the day, Sean's house was completely emptied of everything, and Christopher had returned with a massive cast on his arm. They locked everything up again. William climbed in the U-Haul, Chris got in the Sebring, and once again, they left for Georgia. At some point in the next few days, Bill Cormier heard the sound of his sons pull into the driveway. So he went outside and he found his twins and their Sebring and a U-Haul.
They had someone's belongings, a bunch of comic books in the back of the truck. I had no idea where it came from.
He went over to the back of the moving truck, which was open, and he stood for a moment watching William, who was inside, when he got hit by the smell of death.
Oh my God, what's in there?
He asked William, "What the hell is that?" And William said, "Oh, we hit a dog on the road, and it's in here." And Bill said, "Well, why the hell did you bring it with you?" And William said, "It's a friend's dog, and we didn't want to leave it." Bill thought, that's weird, but he dropped it. The boys then spent the next few days unloading the U-Haul and leaving occasionally to sell things or throw away junk. On September 7th, back at Sean's home, Patricia Burke was getting no answer to her knocks at the front door. She went over to the front window, she looked inside, and she saw that the house was now completely empty. So obviously, she got worried. She started calling family members. Before the end of the day, the police were notified of Sean's absence, finally. Around September 8th, the twins walked into Heroes Cards Comics and Games in Noonan, Georgia, a shop owned by Marshall Ashford, the man who'd began their transaction at Hatsa's Dragon Con booth a week before. William again offered cards to sell, so the two talked prices. Ashford noticed that Christopher just kind of milled about. While making the deal, a specific card caught the attention of Ashford, and instead of summarizing it, I want to read the court transcript for this particular part. Whoever's questioning him says, "Were there any cards in particular you bought that caught your attention that day?" And Ashford said, "Yes, a Korean vampiric tutor." "You said a Korean vampiric tutor?" "Yes, ma'am." "How common or uncommon is that card?" "They're not incredibly hard to find, but you rarely see them." "Okay, when was the last time you saw a Korean vampiric tutor?" "I owned one briefly." "Okay, and when was that?" I had it for a while. I don't even know when I got it." "Did you sell it?" "Yes, ma'am." "Who did you sell it to?" "Sean Dugas." "Those are all my questions, thank you." Ashford ended up paying William $1,000 for the several cards that he bought that day. On September 10th, the boys had their meeting with Jim Brusso set up, so they got in the Sebring on the 9th, and they started their little road trip to Kentucky. But about halfway, the engine of the Sebring exploded, stranding them in Sweetwater, Tennessee. They contacted Brusso, and they set up a meeting at a nearby Pizza Hut instead. It was out of the way for Brusso, but he said given the potential of the cards that were up for sale, which he'd already seen, he didn't mind making the trip. At the meeting, Brusso and Hansa noticed Christopher's new cast, but neither of them asked about it. The meeting took a few hours, and Christopher again never spoke about the cards. He'd often just excuse himself to go outside and smoke or eat pizza. Brusso ended up buying the Garfield-signed Black Lotus and, quote, some Moxes, a Time Walk, Mishra's Workshop, Moat, Dual Lands. In court, he said, quote, they had all the dual lands. We can kind of elaborate on what that means looking at the previous list of stolen cards. Brusso ended up negotiating the purchase of these cards and many others for the total price of $12,021. When asked how much he would value the portion of the collection that he viewed or bought, he said, quote, retail value would approximately be about $50,000 to $60,000. Here's a couple of the notable prices that Brusso does remember paying. He bought that Birds of Paradise Mana short that he saw earlier for $20 and ended up selling it on eBay for $330. Mishra's Workshop was bought as part of bulk for some insane reason, but it's predicted that he spent maybe about $150 on it. Moat from Legends was $50 due to a damaged corner. An unlimited Mox Ruby signed by Richard Garfield was also purchased by him, but conveniently he doesn't remember for how much. And an unlimited Time Walk, he paid $250 and he resold it for $400. And then, of course, the cream of the crop, top of the block, I don't know if that's a thing, the Black Lotus, the unlimited Black Lotus signed by Richard Garfield, bought by Brusso, but conveniently doesn't specify what he paid for it. Anyway, after the Pizza Hut deal, likely the same day, Bill Cormier got a call from William explaining their situation. So Bill took the U-Haul, he rented a tow dolly, and he went to Tennessee to pick up the twins and their Sebring.
It's a tow dolly.
Once back in Georgia, the boys paid $2,000 to replace the Sebring's engine. Then shortly after that, William bought a used BMW for $5,100. Also around this time, Bill began noticing certain things happening in the backyard. It started when he saw his sister's son digging a big pit. And Bill went out and asked him, what are you doing? And the kid said, Will told me to dig this pit for concrete. I guess for like a barbecue pit is what he said. Bill found that strange. He hadn't heard anything about it. Construction of this pit ended up later being continued by William pretty much, mostly at night, until one day, instead of a big pit, there was now a solid block of concrete buried in the ground. However, Bill never saw any barbecue or anything else manifest on top of that spot. With the majority of Sean's collection now sold off at a fraction of the cost, William was left to selling off more of the bulk. So on September 26th, he called a guy named Matt Sipsey, who lived in Athens, Georgia. Matt bought and sold magic cards on Craigslist, and William called him and left a message, and they agreed to meet at a Kroger in Athens, Georgia. Sipsey bought 20,000 to 25,000 cards out of William's trunk for $500. Looking through it, he found that it contained an Alpha Winter Orb signed by the artist, with the words "Slow down there, mate" written on them, and an unlimited Chaos Orb altered with Walt Disney art. The majority of these cards were instantly sold away. On October 8th, James Parsons, with the Pensacola PD, located Sean's 92 Chevy Prism, parked on the 3rd floor of a parking garage at Pensacola International Airport. He reviewed CCTV and noted that the arrival of the car and any visuals of the driver were blocked from the camera. He then had the vehicle towed to downtown police headquarters. On October 9th, Michael Watkins, the Pensacola CSI, shows up with several LEO at Sean's Creighton Road home. The house is locked, but he uses a missing front window pane to unlock the window and gain access to the house.
Again, it's like poetry, so that they rhyme.
Once inside, he observes that the home is practically devoid of objects. However, under the window that he's crawled through, he finds a trash can. And within that trash can, he observes broken glass and what looks like dried blood. He then walks over and unlocks the door for Lieutenant Lee Jennings, who enters and begins spraying down areas for signs of blood. The house is eventually announced a crime scene and is processed throughout the next few days.
Has ruled the death of a man found buried in a backyard under cement a homicide.
Winder, Georgia police say autopsy results show the man found in a blue storage container was killed by several blows to the back of the head, and that the crime happened about a month ago. Winder police also say authorities need to find out where the homicide occurred so that the appropriate agency can file charges. This afternoon, brothers William and Christopher Cormier were charged with murder in the case.
I first met Sean up here at TBS Comics when I first moved in town about 11-12 years ago. A free spirit, as a lot of people tend to know him as. Always friendly, nice to get along with.
In Pensacola, Joe Salvatore, Fox 10 News.
Authorities say they are checking dental records, fingerprints, and trying to identify a tattoo found on the body. Wilcox says Dugas had a third eye tattoo on the back of his
Naruto night tail, first on front. I feel like a Gucci ad-lib. Colder than Coca-Cola, mascot, polo bird. But my sauce on lasagna, it can make Garfield purr. I ain't really fucking with these niggas like it. You can like Tiger, I tell him earn your stripes. You tryna beat me, but big and never in your life. Even if you had them, I think it's like Bow and like Mike. Like, got these niggas watch me be disgusting. I'ma do them dirty like a wingworm. Why they be talking like they might know something? I met a guest on royalty like Lima King. Told her be careful my peanut jelly limousine, and I don't want to hit pussy.
This looked a lot cooler in my mind and was gonna work better. I'm not comfortable at all. So this guy named Detective Harnett, he goes over to Sean's, they're like, hey, we got blood in a trash can, and he's like, well, clearly run that through the database. He starts canvassing the neighborhood, talks to the neighbors. All right, we got it. We're done with this. He goes over to a neighbor, the same guy that was talking to the Cormiers, and he's like, hey, did you see anything? And the guy's like, I did. I saw a U-Haul, and the guy said his name was Will. And the cop's like, well, that's some good info. So he goes to the nearest U-Haul, and he goes, hey, anybody named, Will or William come in around this time? And they're like, yeah, as a matter of fact, he did. He's like, how about that? Let's take a look at the security footage. So he does, he gets that, he gets an identification on who they are, and he calls their home in Winder. Papa Cormier answers the phone, and the detective's like, hey, I'm looking for this guy named Sean Dugas. I heard your sons were friends with him. Do you know where he is? And Papa Cormier got really mad and was like, no, I don't know where he is, and don't call me again, and fuck you. And then he hung up the phone, and then he, I guess, took like 10 minutes, according to him, to kind of stand there and consider all the things that had happened recently. And he was like, maybe this does make a little bit of sense. Maybe I should not blow off for the cops. So he uses a payphone outside the corner store, and he calls Harnett back, and he's like, hey, maybe we should talk. The cops come over to the Winder home, and they end up in the backyard, and they find that slab. And quickly it gets dug up, and they find Sean inside. So aside from Sean, they also find a receipt for concrete. And they go over to the Home Depot, and they go, hey, do you guys have security camera footage for this time? And they're like, yeah. And they check it out, and they're like, hey, there they are, in that Sebring. And that's basically it. Got him dead to rights. They go to court. A rift kind of develops between the two of the brothers. William starts to try to blame it all on Christopher, and Christopher basically just says, no, none of that happened like that. They both they change their stories a lot, both of them. Like, neither one's completely free of guilt here. But William gets, I think, life, if I remember correctly. He gets a long time in jail. Whereas his brother, Christopher, not so much. He's gonna get out sometime in the 2020s. So yeah, that's the end of the video. I guess the Cormiers ended up making about $20,000 at the end of everything when it was all said and done. And they had spent, around $10,000 on cars and engines and stuff like that. U-Hauls and gas. So they made, with all of this, they made under $10,000. So, failure. That's a failure. On top of that, this wonderful collection that somebody spent a lot of time to try to keep together, that people kept trying to take from him, it's now out there in the wind, and it's up to anybody else now. If you want to find those cards, you can. Here's the list to do it, right? I'm showing it to you. Some of this stuff is going to be really easy to find, some of it won't. Some of it probably will never be found, but it's possible. That's what I wanted this to be. I wanted it to be possible now to find, you know, those cards. Thanks for watching.
Again, everyone, I'm Sean Dugas with the Pensacola News Journal and PNJ.com. It's Wednesday afternoon here on Pensacola Beach, and as you can see behind me, the surf is just roaring out here today.